Leonhard Emmerling is an art historian currently serving as the director of the Goethe-Institut in Chicago. After gaining his PhD from the University of Heidelberg, Leonhard worked as a curator at several German museums and lectured at several art schools, including those in Berlin, Munich, Düsseldorf, and Auckland. In 2006, Dr. Emmerling was appointed as the director of the St. Paul Gallery in Auckland, New Zealand, and curated the New Zealand Pavilion at the 53rd Venice Biennale with Judy Miller in 2009. In 2010, he was appointed as the head of visual arts of the Visual Arts Division at the Goethe-Institut's head office in Munich. Dr. Emmerling has authored several books, among others on Jackson Pollock and Jean-Michel Basquiat, and published exhibition catalogs, articles on contemporary art, and contributions to catalogs. His recent publications include Erlösungsmaschinen, Moraldiskurse in der Kunst, English Salvation Machines, Moral Discourses in Art, 2020. That's a great title. And Idioten, eine Kulturgeschichte des Homo Nullus, English Idiots, a Cultural History of Homo Nullus, 2022. And his talk today is called On the Powerlessness of Art.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and thank you very much to Amit Chaudhry to invite me to this talk. I'm very sad that I can't be in Delhi. I used to work in Delhi as a regional director of cultural programming of the Goethe-Institut Max Müller Bauan from 2015 till 2021. I would have loved to come back, and but for some reasons it is not possible. So I'm sorry, and I want to thank everyone who made this talk possible, Sanchit, and of course I want to thank Amit for the invitation. I will read my text so that it's sufficiently focused. I think my talk will be a little bit different to what Amit has just presented. It's a little bit more dry, I'm afraid, but I hope you will bear with me and stay with me. So my talk is centered around the question of art's power and its powerlessness. I will divide it in two parts. The first one is more polemical. The second one is more abstract, taking its cues from system theory. In a way, I hope that the second part makes clear what I polemically address in the first part and why I address it polemically. Please let me start with 5 statements or questions. First, what is the reason that there seems to be a common understanding that art or music or literature or theater has in some way to be useful to the progress and the betterment of society and humankind? Since the 90s of the last century, with what was called relational aesthetics, and had its roots in the heydays of institutional critique, art should, and that's relational aesthetics in a nutshell, be qualified and validated according to the degree of how it can serve as a model for a better world. Art should produce models or paradigms of a harmonious and peaceful, empathetic social life. We saw artists cooking, running barbershops at airports, offering hugs and massages, gardening with inmates of psychiatric asylums, building tree houses for refugees, conducting interviews, producing inventories, intervening in museums by inverting hierarchies. All of this seems laudable and full of good intentions. Addressing societal grievances and serious issues that definitely should be addressed. My concern is not that one doesn't find the artwork anymore, and I strongly disagree with the response of the press to the last documenta in Kassel, that the focus on process and participation instead on production left visitors baffled and frustrated, looking desperately for real works in the sense of a painting on a wall. My concern is rather that art is asked to comply with a certain norm. Ideas of how a society should work are necessarily normative. Should art fit into the mold of social norms? Should art comply with norms? Second, in conjunction with the idea that art should be useful, the claim is made that art should be political. I wonder what that means. Political in which sense? Most of the time, the term political is used synonymously with critical, which in most cases vaguely implies perspectives on one could call left perspectives, perspectives in the tradition of enlightened socialism, which I fully endorse. But that doesn't resolve my feeling of unease when it comes to the requirement that art has to be anything in the first place. And more concretely, that art has to be political. Never, if you look at the time period since the French Revolution, has art been more political than in the context of authoritarian regimes, may they be fascist or totalitarian in any other way. Never, since the dawn of modernism, contributed art more explicitly and devotedly to the general direction society was meant to take than in Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union or China. And even if we make the remark that in these cases art was only an affirmative tool to support politics, art was reduced to an auxiliary role and was therefore not really art, while what we expect from art is to be political in the form of criticality. What form of criticality are we talking about? When, at least in the liberal capitalist societies of the global north, criticality is the highest prized property of art when you want to be successful on the market. How then do we deal with the fact that criticality in Western society works to the effect that it stabilizes the political structures precisely by ways of being critical? It affirms and cements what it criticizes because it gives the system the opportunity to demonstrate its flexibility, its elasticity, its endorsement of tolerance and diversity by swallowing critical positions and turning them into building blocks for the next phase of its operation. 3. Look at the press material and statements of biennials or major exhibitions. You find again and again similar claims regarding the impact they are intending to have. The exhibition should serve as an incubator for societal and political change, a platform for the critical investigation of power structures, a tool to scrutinize the relationship between capitalism, ecological disaster, and racism, and what else. Curators seem to have a strong desire to underscore that they don't waste public money or private funding, but produce something useful, something meaningful. And they weigh in with their creativity and the creativity of the artists they chose to exhibit, as if creativity still would be that primordial human innocent force that subverts society's sclerotic structures, as Joseph Beuys had dreamed. And they turn a blind eye on the fact that creativity is, since at least the last 30 years, the most valuable resource for digital capitalism. And that therefore the creative class not only contributes beautifully to the gentrification of neighborhoods, but also gave digital capitalism the model how to extract resources, while still providing the impression that one as a creative producer is actively working on nothing else than one's own self-realization, while the monetary benefit is just a side effect. This is what Foucault meant with the term of post-disciplinary society. No one needs to threaten or discipline us anymore. We discipline ourselves out of our own will, preemptively. And this leads to another question. What happened to subculture? What happened even to the possibility of what once was called counterculture? What about the refusal to participate, the rejection of the option to contribute something useful to the machinations of society? What about Dada, early pop art? What about punk? No politics, no criticality, simple and straightforward sabotage. Do we condemn this now because it was too obstructive? What about Adorno's belief that art has to be asocial, antisocial, non-social, that it has to be useless, since only when it is useless, it refuses to be traded for something else in the society of permanent transactions. The useless will not be traded, as it has no exchange value. And only if it is of no exchange value, it keeps the utopian belief alive that there is a possibility of a world and a life of dignity that is not at risk to be exchanged for something else. A life that has its worth in itself. What has value has no price. What has value cannot be traded. But isn't capitalism able to suck in simply everything that can be turned into a monetary value, even the junk, the trash, the useless, due to the mechanics of dialectics? The principle of dialectics in the field of philosophy enables the mind to look into its own operational logic and to criticize and to improve it. In regard to capitalism, the same principle enables this productive machinery to incorporate even strictly antagonistic forces and turn them into drivers for change, for moving into the same old direction with even more strength, but in a much more subtle fashion. It makes us almost believe that it is a benevolent force. Capitalist dialectics guarantee the emergence of the new. This is what affiliates capitalism with art. Both produce the new, and both depend to be operational on the newness of what they produce. The obsession with newness, associated with the idea of constant change, drives capitalism, and it drives the art world, and not only the art market. As criticality is a major component in this operational logic, it enforces and strengthens the working of what as criticality it is targeting. My last point. All this seems to be only pertinent to more or less liberal, more or less capitalistic, and more or less democratic societies. Evidently, it's not true to authoritarian regimes, where even the faintest specter of critical thinking leads to arrest. We are then confronted with a paradox that where art is most powerless, inasmuch as it is restricted, banned, oppressed, and censored, it is most powerful. Every gesture counts, every word matters, every image makes a difference. Whereas in liberal societies, where artistic freedom is of crucial relevance, art as a social praxis lacks the urgency it has in restrictive contexts. Where it has the freedom to claim its potential to instigate change, it competes with other social forces. And my suspicion is that these forces are more powerful. Are you still with me? Nice. Thank you very much. Now comes the second part. And I kind of oversimplify the matter for the sake of clarity, what I try to say. There were two very important philosophers, sociologists, Niklas Luhmann, who died in the 90s, and the philosopher Jürgen Habermas, who's still alive. And there were not many points they ever agreed upon, but they both defined politics as a practice of organizing social life by establishing and enforcing binding decisions. This is what politics does. It uses power to regulate and to structure the complexity of social life. Its medium, as Luhmann would have said, is power. The medium of politics is power, and it operates according to the distinction of having power or not having power. System theory considers the sphere of politics as one of several subsystems of society. Justice, science, economy, arts, and love are other subsystems. All subsystems operate in their respective medium and according to their own logic of binary distinctions. Justice operates according to this distinction just, unjust. Economy according to the logic scarce, available. Science according to the logic true, false. Interestingly, for the arts and the sphere of morality, system theory couldn't identify the respective medium in the binary code of distinction. These makes both systems exceptions. All subsystems fulfill certain functions for society and for other subsystems. As soon as they cannot fulfill these functions, they vanish. To be able to maintain their functionality, they need to constantly improve the code or the mode of distinction they are using and they are based on. Contemporary societies are functionally diversified, and the law of diversification separates different social spheres into even more subspheres or subsystems. But not only this, it also inserts new distinctions in already established distinctions. With an ever-evolving complexity of society, all subsystems need to develop internal differentiations. The distinction that separates economy from law re-enters the sphere of, let's say, the law, as it needs to develop legal systems to regulate the economy, and these regulations are different to the regulations pertaining to public transport or copyright or warfare or the freedom of expression. Each subsystem sub-diversifies, and by doing this, increases its autonomy within society. However, what it needs to maintain is a possibility that the communication within the subsystem keeps flowing. One can best illustrate that with the medium money, in which the economy operates. Money is the absolute empty signifier. Its value depends entirely on its own scarcity, what we see when inflation is battled through raising the interest rates, and the scarcity of products one can exchange with its help. Its absolute emptiness enables money to travel through the different subsystems of the economy, from grocery stores to real estate to the stock market and back. The finer the code, the more suitable to different sub-differentiations, and the less irritated by the interference from other subsystems or other elements of the environment, the better it works. One interference, however, might, for instance, come from politics. The World Bank increases interest rates. One interference might come from the law. A payment was illegal, sanctions kick in, accounts get confiscated, and the yachts stop sailing. Any interference from the environment is detrimental to the functioning of a subsystem. For this reason, each subsystem tries to perfect its mode and logic of operation, and tries to insulate itself against the impact from the outside. At the same time, there is a tendency that subsystems usurp the function of other subsystems. This is best illustrated by the battles between political powers and legal systems. The legislator, and we see that happening all over the place, tries to weaken the judiciary by undermining selection processes of judges or by manipulating administrative procedures, which means it extends its operational logic, the logic of power, and diminishes the ability of the subsystem justice to fulfill its functions. This is when societies begin to tumble. What's art got to do with all of this? In one sentence, art cannot be politics. Let me make 4 arguments. Immanuel Kant, whose 300th birthday we celebrate this year, made in his Critique of Judgment the distinction between reflective judgment and determinative judgment. One is able to make a determinative judgment when it is possible to determine the relationship between a means and an end. This or that is a good tool to achieve this or this end. Or when, in his perspective, it comes to the moral judgment. As we all know, the categorical imperative provided in his view the direction. But the judgment on art, and as he saw it on beauty, does not work like the judgment on the purposefulness of a tool or an action. What characterizes the judgment on beauty is its purposefulness without purpose. It is impossible to determine what beauty is. Hence, what the judgment is in congruence with is only its own operational logic. What is undecidable, the question of beauty, needs to remain non-determinative. It needs to remain reflexive. The judgment, therefore, has its purpose in judging what has no purpose, by remaining a reflexive and not a determinative judgment, which means the relationship between art, or art and beauty, and social life cannot be equal to the relationship between morality and social life. With Kant, the classical triad between the good, the true, and the beautiful came to an end. Neither is the beautiful necessarily good nor necessarily true. It's only an appearance. That the judgment works according to its own logic, it is purposeful to judge a phenomenon whose purpose cannot be defined, determines its autonomy. The logic of the aesthetic judgment is unique in the social fabric. Its autonomy, based on its operational logic, is, to the contrary of what Adorno thought, not autonomy against society, but autonomy within society. Only on the basis of autonomy, art and the judgment on art are able to fulfill a certain function in society. What this function could be, I would like to indicate at the end of my talk. For the moment, it's sufficient, but also important to keep in mind, it is the judgment's operational logic that art's autonomy is based on. And this autonomy is autonomy within society. 3. If the aesthetic judgment is necessarily reflexive and not determinative, there is no possibility of distilling conclusions that would lead in any way to the establishment and the enforcement of binding decisions and measures. And this is what we call politics. Politics is the establishment of binding decisions, and it is the enforcement of these decisions in the medium of power and, if necessary, by force and violence. Fourth, let me make one last distinction. This is the distinction between the political and politics. Hannah Arendt and philosophers like Chantal Mouffe formed the idea of the political in opposition to the term politics. While politics is, as we have heard now often enough, the praxis of establishing and enforcing binding decisions, the political, in their view, is a praxis of the coordination of the social life as the living together of the many different. It is a permanent deliberation about ways of living together. It's the permanent reflection on how differences can simultaneously persist and be reconciled with each other. It is the debate of the members of the polis on the agora, where free people meet and exchange their ideas and points of view. There is no termination of any kind to this deliberation, only temporary agreements about a good way forward. The organization of social life in the sense of the political includes every interaction between individuals, from the way we make love to the way we sit together in auditoriums or discuss the arts. In this sense, everything falls into the realm of the political, but the realm of the political is still vastly different to what we call politics. As a way of concluding, if the arts can have a certain purpose, as relational aesthetics wanted, and if the arts can serve as a model for something, for instance, for a more human, a better society, the artwork necessarily needs to be different to what it denotes. A model can never be what it refers to. It indicates what it is not. It is the logic of representation that what is represented is not present. What separates the model from what it represents is called, in the field of the arts, the aesthetic difference. Both the model and its object are part of reality, but what separates both parts is the as-if. The model operates in the mode of the as-if. And by being located on that side of the aesthetic difference, the side of the as-if, it is able to elucidate what it refers to. The work of art, hence, is one of the instances where reality splits up itself into separate spheres, one sphere observing what happens in the other sphere. One part of reality observing the other, both being of the same category, reality, but belonging to different classes of objects. The artwork, one can say, plunges a hole into reality, which it is a part of by being the unity of difference, the difference of the real and its representation. It is obvious that because of this difference, the aesthetic difference, communication about the arts and arts as a communication is far more complex and far more confusing than communication should be in the field of politics. Politics try to reduce complexity by means of power. Arts increase complexity by means of introducing difference and contingency and demanding reflection. The powerlessness of art, therefore, is not a deficit. It's a faculty. If art is a force, it is a force to oppose politics by producing irreducible complexity. Thank you very much. That was my contribution. Thank you. I don't know how we organize that question and answer kind of thing. I hope there are questions.
Yeah, I'm paying attention. So the floor is open to whatever questions there are for Dr. Emmerling. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Just is a short question. I mean, and correct me if I understood you wrongly, but there's this relation of this approach or this point of view of the as-if, which one could say is like the fictitiousness of art, compared, I don't know how you would name the other side, but it could be like the as such or the itself. I don't know. I'm not an English speaker, but it tends to refer to something like the facticity of politics. And in that distance between art and facticity, or between the as-if and the as such or the itself, or however you would name it, I would wonder, how do historically they relate to each other? Because you tend to put them as two separate realms, and I completely agree with your position, but I wonder if there's not a more of a dynamic historically where the facticity of politics is in the end always constructed by a creative art act, by it as if that had happened at a certain moment in time, and then it had in a way decanted, or it had been the interrupted moment had been erased. It had been, like Nietzsche said, like metaphors, they become like worn on time. So I was wondering if this as if and this as such, or this art and facticity or art and politics, they really are all the time in separate lanes, or they tend to cross and inseminate each other historically.
Mm-hmm. I would say that the turning period, or there's not a turning point, but a long phase of change at least in Europe, happened during secularization, when objects of veneration, religious objects, statues, or whatever, they all of a sudden were aesthetically validated. Not you didn't believe in the miraculous work of a Pietà anymore. You looked at it from, oh, what does it say about us as humans, or what's the composition of it? And that goes together or in parallel with the establishment of institutions like museums. The Wunderkammer at the beginning, then the museums were. It was a transfer from the religious sphere into the aesthetic sphere. So you didn't see Mary or Christ or whatever as being the Christ on the lap of Mary, the tortured Christ. He was not really tortured. It was a symbol of torture. So I think the as if happened during that time or emerged during that time of secularization. And they cross disseminate. I'm sure they do. I'm sure that the arts, the literature, music, whatever, produces ideas and fictitious scenarios. We look at and think, oh wow, that's possible. Maybe it's possible. Maybe we can do that. But it's still not politics, and that's my argument. I think we have the art world in many instances tries to prove that it's not just a waste of money. No, it's useful for something. And then the aspiration is we change the world tomorrow. But it's not. That's not the case. But art lives on for very, very long time. That's a difference, you know. When we do politics, we want to have the change now. It's supposed to do that. That's what it's for. But art isn't. Does it make sense?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was pushing it in the sense of, I mean, you mentioned Foucault before. Just as Foucault said, you cannot have power, which is the act of politics, without knowledge. One wonders if one could have power without a certain symbolization that comes from the aesthetics. So I'm using art now in a very broad sense, in a theory of the sensible. So could we have power without an agreement, a certain common agreement on the aesthetic field, just as it's difficult to exert power without having a certain knowledge that is shared, because then you can just not command because you don't have it. Epistemologically, you cannot understand each other. Well, in the sense way that knowledge appeals, then Kantian is speaking, as you were speaking before, to the intellect. At the level of the sensibility, one could think that there is necessary aesthetics operating when power is operating. That's more the question I was trying to make.
Oh yeah, I totally disagree. I totally agree. I mean, this is what Walter Benjamin said in that famous statement that fascism is the aestheticization of politics, right? The more authoritarian or the more totalitarian political system is, the more it is also dependent, and it tries to establish powerful aesthetic symbols or forms. You know, think just about what the Nazis did with the Reichstagsgelände in Nuremberg. I mean, these were aesthetic symbols of power. So politics use aesthetics, if you want to call that aesthetics. Politics use visual and acoustic and any form of manipulation it can get hold of. But this is not necessarily art. I have another concept of art.
Thank you so much. It's interesting you left out the second half of that Benjamin quotation, which communism responds by politicizing art. I'm guessing you don't agree with that bit. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
You put your finger on a number of things that I've been thinking about. The way in which the art world and artists in liberal societies are deluding themselves about their criticality and the sense of what they think is political arts, that in fact it's of affirmative function and so on. and you know, that's a number of things chime with the things I was thinking. I was just wondering if you could help us perhaps relate this to the theme of the conference. And are you sort of saying, and when you think of the biennales and the sort of the booming in both senses, right? You know, sort of commercial market value of the art world, is that sort of art that you describe, this sort of, you know, self-deluded, critical, where criticality is the most valuable commodity that you can have, is that the art of the boom? And then what's the art of the bust? Is that art that sort of recognizes its disruptive, reflexive refusal, its opposition to politics in that Habermasian, Luhmannian sense? Is that sort of what you're saying, if we're trying to fit it into the categories that Amit set up for this conference?
Difficult question. I mean, I think I indicated where I saw historically the bust art. I mean, something like punk, as unfashionable and ugly it is, yeah, and it was. It had a radicality, by an extreme radicality, by refusing to be useful. They're just saying, no, we don't produce anything meaningful. And the same is with Dada in 1916 in Zurich, where they gave up on engaging with these dialectical machinations of society. And I think you're right. The biennial art, whatever, the art circus is the booming business at the moment, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, if it produces economical surplus, nothing wrong with it. I'm not criticizing that, but I criticize that if you have the Istanbul Biennial, and you have every other year, you have the same pompous claims by curators, and all societal change. Where the hell is it happening? What happens in Turkey at the moment? Certainly, it doesn't move in any liberal direction. So this is just one instance, and maybe art has lasting effects on us. But it is not what politics is supposed to do. That's my only point. Art is valuable. I love art. I'm an art historian. Yeah, there was a reason why I studied that. But I think we should save art from these claims that art should be political, or politics, that it should be politics. We should, I think, if art has a purpose, maybe it has a purpose of countering politics by something else. Thank you.
Are you using the term art in the sense of culture much more widely than one would normally speak of when talking of art?
I didn't want to limit myself to visual arts. So this is why I speak about all kinds of art forms: music, literature, dance, theater, opera, whatever. So I didn't want to limit myself to that talk to visual arts, but I'm not speaking about culture. I think for me, culture is not for me. I try to understand what culture could mean. So you have culture of, I don't know, hooligan culture, you have TV culture, you have all kinds of culture. So so I try to understand. Actually, I try to avoid the word culture. I try to be more specific. Did that answer your question, sir? Cool, thanks.
I'd like to say that art is also an expression of the political, in the sense that if there's politics, we live political lives. All the personal and the political are very connected. So if you experience something and you express it in the form of art, so that art will be political art, wouldn't it be like that? What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. This is why I try to, maybe I didn't make that strong enough, but I try to establish that difference between the political and politics. When I define politics as the establishment and the enforcing of binding decisions, then it's actually the opposite to the political, to what I think you speak about. The political is that kind of exchange we have now. We can see that room and that screen as our agora. And this is where we meet and try to come to an understanding of each other and about what we're talking about. This is, I love that Hannah Arendt phrasing. It's the living together of the many different. That's what the political is, and that's not politics. But I agree. This is why I said lovemaking, sitting together, having a coffee, it's political. If I decide to paint a painting, it is the political, but it's not politics.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
I'll just pass it on to her. Yeah, I'll pass it on to you after just asking a couple of questions or making some observations, actually. Leonhard, thank you so much. This is Amit.
Oh, thank you for the invitation.
No,
Great.
Yeah, ever since I kind of spotted your work on the powerlessness of art, I admire you for saying something, that is possibly true, but sounds almost absurd as to become a provocation in the kind of milieu we live in now. What kind of intrigued me was you coming to this idea anew in this moment. I just some stray observations. I'll see if I have a question. I think I do, but I have too many questions to put to you right now. Stray observation number one, since you were enumerating your points as well, like criticality, the word criticality. So again, I see exactly what you're saying. I'm immediately kind of reminded of how criticality. So you maybe you're using that word with a very specific meaning, but criticality can also have exactly the same kind of uselessness that creativity. In exactly the sense you are talking about, purposeful, purposiveness, or purposelessness. I'm thinking, is your talk a kind of, your talk is slightly polemical. I guess it has some use, but I'm wondering whether it's veering towards a criticality of uselessness, not just advocating uselessness, but, in some way embracing the tendency of uselessness itself. And there is a whole lineage of such criticism, I suppose. Kant might seem the earliest one in terms of Western critical thought, but critical thought begins, the lineage of uselessness in critical thought begins, long before Kant, I think. And Kant is probably exposed to some of that lineage of advocating uselessness in critical thought, maybe with the Gita. I don't know. Same source for Matthew Arnold, who revisits this idea of uselessness or disinterestedness. The Gita in Charles Wilkins's translation comes out in 1785. I think Kant is talking about, this third critique that you're talking is 1790, right? And
yeah.
And then he's talking about beauty, and he's talking about creativity, purposeful purposelessness, and then those ideas, he's talking about disinterestedness as well, not in the Enlightenment sense of objectivity, but in the sense of, because disinterested we kind of conflate with an Enlightenment sense of fairness or objectivity or scientific rationality. This is how we think at least in English, of the word disinterested, without an interested investment. But Kant is not saying that he's talking about objectivity. He's talking about a kind of suspension of desire in the contemplation of beauty. So it's a kind of interestedness without outcome. Arnold is revisiting that idea, but in terms of criticism. He's saying criticism does not have to be a criticism of evaluation. He makes this distinction in his study of criticism, or I can't remember the exact title of the essay, where he talks about Wordsworth, saying that we don't have enough good critics these days. All the critics are terrible. Wordsworth is talking about the fact that we need critics who will perform their task purposefully, that they will tell us which book is, or which poem is good and which is bad. And Arnold is saying, great, absolutely, but that's not what I mean by criticism. Criticism is the free ranging of thought. That's what he talks about. He severs it from outcome in his idea. So criticality, I'm wondering if you can do more or something, well, whether we can weave it into your argument about uselessness rather than it be the other of it.
I mean, my emphasis was on when I spoke about criticality, my emphasis was on these dialectics that liberal societies can incorporate criticism. They use it for their own improvement, and that's totally fine. This is the idea of being critical, that also self-critical, that I understand the way my mind processes information, and it looks at itself. So it's the mind looking at itself, that with the purpose of improving its own functionality, if you want, by trying to make a differentiation between what is real and what is a semblance, what is a fake, what is the truth. So yeah, why not saying it's a meandering, it's a wandering, that's totally fine with me. Criticality doesn't need to have a straightforward purpose. But can I just say one word to the disinterestedness with Kant? Kant didn't. I mean, he was totally clear. This is why the aesthetic judgment is always reflexive. There is no objectivity in the aesthetic judgment. It's always subjective. The disinterestedness that he emphasizes so much comes from his, or has a goal to say, well, if I kind of disappear or vanish as Leonhard Emmerling, who I am, with my interests and my preferences and my leanings, I try to look at something not like oh, this is an erotic painting. So the eroticism is crossed out when I look at a nude woman. I should look at something else, disinterested. And only then my aesthetic judgment becomes kind of comparable, or can be not comparable. It can be communicated. It becomes intersubjectively valid. Only when I, as that individual that I am, kind of disappears in its aesthetic judgment, becomes transparent, then the aesthetic judgment can be communicated and can be understood by someone else who's a different person. I think that's the idea behind Kant's disinterestedness. And of course, it is related to it's purposeful without purpose.
And it's related to pleasure as well. I mean, the person is looking at the erotic painting. The person looking at it is no longer Leonhard Emmerling in the sense of being directed by Leonhard Emmerling's sort of background or whatever
Yeah.
in a very narrow understanding of those terms at that point. The person is not looking at the erotic painting simply for the purpose of looking at a piece of erotica. They are disinterested, but they are also, that disinterestedness is leading to the experience of pleasure, right?
Yeah. And the experience of pleasure is caused by the experience of beauty. Kant says the interest should not be at the beginning of the aesthetic action or aesthetic judgment, but it can be a consequence of the aesthetic judgment that I have an interest. And he says, well, you have an interest then in the continuity of the existence of the aesthetic object. And in his late writings, he says something quite beautiful. Beauty makes us feel that the world is our place. So it has a purpose. It can have an interest, or it raises, it wakes up an interest. It wakes up an interest in remaining in the world.
Thank you so much.
So there's a question.
Thank you, Amit.
There's a question over here and here. I just want to point out that I think it's interesting that in this conversation about interest and disinterest, according to Kant, we're talking about erotic paintings when his example is a palace, connected to whether I think palaces should exist or not. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really very enlightening and interesting. So I just had one or two things to say. Of course, we're talking about Kant and disinterestedness and all, but I was thinking more in terms of, the psychoanalytical and the psychological and how the disinterestedness holds there, particularly the idea of Kristeva's and the abject mother and how she interprets Bellini's mother. Apart from that, also, yes, I do find it very interesting. You're looking at art in a liberal society as a safety valve, almost like a carnivalesque, and therefore, only contributing to looking at the state as benevolent, as tolerant, and therefore reducing any kind of counter narrative. But at the same time, I also was wondering about how you talked about newness and newness as a quality of liberal capitalist society, where I went back to Derek Attridge, and I was looking at his idea of instrumental rationality and his idea of singularity of literature and inventiveness as being the absolutely distinguishing traits of literature, and I would extend it to say art. And how, this is what actually separates it from, as you were saying, usefulness and instrumentalism of a society. And therefore comes this whole a kind of knot between what the digital capitalism calls newness and what we mean in terms of aesthetics, what is uniqueness and singularity and experience that you have not experienced, that is something rare. And finally, yes, I did understand a kind of almost deconstructionist approach where the artwork speaks something else than what it overtly intends to speak. And so how we need to look at it in terms of that complexity to get out the power of the work of art. So yes, I completely relate to that. But again, the idea of money as an empty signifier, again, I have, you wanted to relate it to the actual practice of art. And I wanted to see about the scarcity, as you were saying, but look at it in this way. There are artists who are so prolific that they are mass producing artworks, and all these artworks are selling. And then comes the politics of scarcity. And even that is assimilated because these artists who are scarce, their artworks which are scarce are going to auctions. So in any case, the prolific artists as well as the artists who are not so many in number are literally generating this kind of money. And that is the problem, I think, that you were also trying to sort of hint at in terms of biennales and the commercialization. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you summed up my what I had to say very nicely. Thank you very much. There's a one can as I say, I have no problem with that an artwork is also a piece that can be sold and bought, and that it's a commodity. It's fine. I think for me, artworks get validated and get devalidated. Look at the 19th century Academy painting, French Academy painting. I mean, it was totally disregarded for decades, and now it comes back. You could find it in the trash, and so artworks grow in value and they shrink. The criticism I have is really that there is this ambition that art equals politics. That's really is my point. That I think, and I try to make that argument starting with Kant, that it's also logically that it's logically not working. Not only in reality, it doesn't work. When I say about all these biennials that always claim that they can change societies, it doesn't actually work, but it also doesn't work logically. That's my argument, I think.
Do we need to bring it to a close, or one last question? Is it a quick one? All right, then.
Yeah, Professor, the way we are talking of politics which is anti-people, anti-welfare, is not friendly with this critical art. So they are the people who are not accepting this criticism. So this is the only way, or anything else in democracy.
Can you? I'm so very sorry. I'm afraid I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, I'm asking people in establishment who are anti-people or anti-welfare of the society, they are not accepting critical or in form of art, culture and everything. That's why they are not accepting criticism.
I mean, when I understand you correctly, then you ask about whether authoritarian regimes accept criticism. Yeah, obviously, unfortunately not. I mean, just look at Russia. What's happening there? It's a tragedy. It's an absolute drama, and it of course it shows the weakness of that regime, but it asks so many sacrifices. It's depressing. Did that answer your question, sir?
Thank you.
Okay,
In that
cool.
case, we have to wrap it up. Thank you very much, Dr. Emmerling, for joining us virtually. And I think
Thank you everyone for coming and attending my talk. I really enjoyed it, and I'm just very, very sad that I couldn't be there in person. I consider Delhi my third hometown. I had a great time there. Thank you.